Delighted to be here today. Delighted to be presenting Searching the Old Line State Online. To get us started, what is the Old Line State? I know we all come to all types of knowledge, genealogy and history, coming from different experiences. So I know not everyone may necessarily know what the Old Line State is. That name comes to us, or that nickname comes to us from George Washington, whether when you think of George Washington, you think of Christopher Jackson, or you think of the more traditional George Washington. But when Maryland is called the Old Line State, essentially we are honoring the not the mercenaries, the militia, not the mercenaries, the militia, particularly from Baltimore, who worked with Washington or served under Washington at the Battle of Long Island. They were known for holding the line, and it really is a compliment to the men who served during the Revolutionary War. And then we're talking about online. Well, we all know that there's oodles of stuff online. You all are online people because you got here today. You know, sometimes I do talk to genealogists and historians who don't do a lot of online work. I have Maryland patrons who make a point of staying away from being online. But we know there's oodles and oodles of stuff online. Did you know that when you Google oodles, you get noodles and poodles? I didn't know that till a little while ago when I was confirming that I actually spelled oodles correctly. So first I just put those up there to kind of be cute. But then as I was going over my PowerPoint one more time, I realized that I actually can tie it into the theme in some ways. So when we look at genealogy, when we look at utilizing any type of source, whether it's an online source, whether it's a book source, whether it's a manuscript, whether it's a particular institution, we do have a situation that is like the noodles there, where what is the particular ingredient that we have that will really make, that recipe really be superb? It will make our genealogy really stand out. And it takes lots of things to do genealogy, as you all know, to really get a good picture of your family and your family's place in the world. You need lots of ingredients. You need lots of different types of ingredients. You need your vegetables, but you also need your noodles. So that you need a variety of things. And then with poodles, the way I was tying that in is that, we have, poodles are known very much for being show dogs. Not all poodles are, but you can have a wonderful poodle who is not a show dog who you love dearly. So I equate that to being, we have large institutions that have lots of things. And then we have really teeny weeny institutions that are open once when the moon is blue, where you will find one thing that really makes the incredible difference to your own research. So again, oodles. And what I'm emphasizing today, and really what is the kind of the core of what I'm going to be talking about, which is again why please don't hesitate to contact me after the fact, because while there are oodles of things online, there are oodles of types of records and documents and particular genealogy research questions. And obviously I can only cover so much, and I'm mostly covering those things that I thought about in the last week or so, and not necessarily the things that all of you are thinking about. So don't hesitate, again, to contact me. But the emphasis, what I'm really kind of fixating on, or where I have pulled from the sources, from the online sources I'm going to present to you this evening, are those things that we have been utilizing, particularly during the pandemic. Frederick County Public Libraries is yet to be open to the public. We are open for curbside pickup, but that doesn't relate at all to my Maryland room, which is a non-circulating collection. And our building has not been open to the public. My coworker and I aren't allowed in our space at the same time. She comes in on Tuesdays and then she catalogs from home the rest of the time. I'm in there Wednesday through Sundays. So what we have been doing is a lot of reference, and we were completely closed that we weren't even allowed in the building probably for about a month. But as with all public librarians and as information professionals in all types of institutions, none of us stopped working. And as I'm sure many of you who began working at home and may still work at home, it wasn't that we haven't been working. So right from the start of our close to the public and our building being closed, we have been doing reference. And we have been doing a lot of reference. And a lot of that reference we've had to do at least for a month. And even sometimes now when we're putting in our hours, in the dark of night, we have to rely even more on online resources. As all genealogy librarians and as all you genealogists, we deal with many different types of sources. So I tend to be very oriented towards books and manuscripts because I'm an archivist, but at the same time, there are databases that I use every day constantly. But we have found that there were certain sites that we used more that allowed us greater access to meet the information needs of our patrons. We also found that once we were closed to the public, that there were particular types of sources that came particularly important. We started getting a lot of questions about newspapers. And also we started more than we usually do. I mean, we get a lot of questions about newspapers, but even more than that. And then we always spend a lot of time on title search and land records. It's something that my facility has been particularly strong at. I think I had a background. I was a very bad architectural historian, but it made me understand the world of architectural research in a way that I think has benefited us a great deal. And I also have a wonderful volunteer. And while my coworker and I have been working from afar, we have volunteers who also have been working from afar, and she does a lot of title searches. So though you're going to see a lot of emphasis on both of those things. But again, let me just say one more time, my email is in the chat. Do not hesitate to contact me about anything that I talk about this evening or anything that I don't talk about this evening. Okay, so as we start moving forward and jumping into online, I first want to kind of take, a lay of the land, the virtual, not the virtual land, the real land, the three-dimensional land. For those of you who are not from Maryland, this is the Catoctin Mountains, which are in northern Frederick County. This actually is the Catoctin Park, which is part of the national park. We have two parks in northern Frederick County, the Catoctin Park, which is the national park. Camp David is connected to this park. And then also we have Cunningham Falls. If you had people who came through Pennsylvania and then came through Maryland, either staying in Maryland or heading down into Virginia or down the Appalachians, continuing on, this is what they would have come through. But what I'd like to talk about right now really fast are those sites, those real life sites that I want to make sure we're all familiar with so that we're all on the same level, because I know not all of you are from Maryland and you may not know the facilities that are kind of what I'm going to call kind of the big four. Okay, so the first is the Maryland State Archives. Some of these I'm going to touch upon later, or at least I'm going to touch upon particular aspects of their collection. But again, just so we know what I consider to be the big four. So the Maryland State Archives, which is a Maryland governmental facility, they are the institution of the records of enduring value of Maryland's government and the governmental records of the municipalities of Maryland. They are a relatively new institution, not started until the 20th century. They also have collected over time manuscript collections and personal papers. Then we have the Maryland Center for History and Culture, which is the Maryland Historical Society. They rebranded sometime during the pandemic. So if you haven't been in the Baltimore area, you may not be familiar with that they've rebranded. But so now it's the Maryland Center for History and Culture, but they were the Maryland Historical. They are really our largest nonprofit collecting institution. They existed way before the Maryland State Archives. They were a 19th century facility, and they will not have governmental records of enduring value, but they have manuscript collections. They have a museum as well and a very large library. Then we have the Maryland Department of the Ignat Pratt Free Library. The Pratt is the library system in Baltimore City. The Pratt is the main branch of the Baltimore City library system. The Maryland Department is sort of what I consider kind of my cousin institution. I want to give a little extra love to them since they are a public library. So you get to see a picture. This was when they opened their new facility a few years back. They are the largest genealogy collection in a public library in the state of Maryland. They collect for the entire state. They're very heavily genealogical. They're just like most public library collections. Of course, they're very special because none of us are the same. And then we have the Maryland Room at the University of Maryland. This is an institution I think many genealogists don't think about. As you probably, some of you know, some academic institutions will collect local history and genealogy, or local history that can be utilized for genealogy. And some are more welcoming to genealogists than others. The Maryland Room is very welcoming to genealogists and has many fabulous local history collections. So these are the ones where I like to, when I talk to genealogists, such as yourselves, I often like to say that in theory, I like to think you have a bulletin board in your mind, or the bulletin board that's in your genealogy cave and on your bulletin board, you have sticky notes, as we can see here, that touch upon or that would include certain things that in theory, if you're very systematic, and I will admit that I'm not very systematic, but that you'd regularly go to. So the big four are the institutions where I think you should regularly get in the habit of searching their catalogs. going into their websites and looking at their finding aids and their pathfinders, seeing if they have new added content. And by added content, I mean, do they have any new databases up? Do they have any new postcard collections up? Do they have anything that they have created or that their volunteers have created or that they've got received from a genealogist somewhere that they've put up? So again, what I like to encourage people to do is that to be systematic, just like you should regularly check Cindy's list for things that you care about, whether it's a surname or a place or a concept. And the big four are the places where I think you should regularly go and check their catalogs, look for their things, just see what they have to kind of, how you change your smoke detectors, you change the battery in your smoke detectors certain times of year. Those are the same sorts of things you should do with the big four. Of course, the big four, I just call them the big four because they are big. I'm not saying that they are any more special than the rest of us. I'm a firm believer that, all institutions, we are not all the same, but we are all equal. And as I said before, you can spend days at Library of Congress and find nothing that enriches your genealogy. You end up at a little teeny place that's open once a year and you find fabulous things. So there are also other collections that you should regularly think about as relevant to your research. Obviously, if you're people on the Eastern Shore, checking the Western Maryland Room at Washington County Free Library, which Washington County is the county to the west of Frederick. For those of you who don't know the state, Frederick is right in the center. We are an hour west of Baltimore and an hour north of DC. We kind of make a little triangle there. And then Washington County, which was originally Frederick County, is to our west. So it's one of those places, if you have people in Western Maryland, you should regularly check. And the sorts of things you should check for. Again, this is the website from the Western Maryland Room. And you'll see down there, they regularly post new materials that they have in their collection. And here's a nice little list here of the 9 new items that they have added to their collection. So again, the sorts of things that I always tell people, again, in the bulletin board in your mind, if you're very systematic, the places you should regularly check. And then, of course, there's my own Maryland Room in Frederick County Public, the NAB Center, which is on the Eastern Shore, which is at Salisbury University. If you have people from the Eastern Shore, that's a superb collection. And of course, the many little historical societies. And then there are other academic institutions as well. University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Don't rule out academic institutions. Some academic institutions, I will admit, are not always as excited to see genealogists, but many do collect local history materials, particularly in the last 20 or 30 years with the growth of cultural history. They collect these materials often to meet the information needs and the academic needs and the teaching needs of their faculty, and it's also to your benefit as well. Okay, so all those places, I'm only going to really touch upon very little. I'm also not going to touch really upon what I'm going to call the commercial websites, and also because of following back on my theme of the Noodles, kind of the chain restaurants of the genealogy world. So Ancestry, whether it's Ancestry Library Edition or Ancestry.com, and there are some superb Maryland things in all of these. Heritage Quest, and then Family Search. But that said, I am going to touch upon, to start us out, with one particular collection in Family Search, which is not brand new, but has been up for, 2 or 3 years, or at least we became aware of it 2 or 3 years ago, and has really changed our life and has been incredibly useful, particularly during the pandemic. This probably looks familiar to many of you who use Family Search, and hopefully all of you, if you don't use Family Search, you will go after this, you'll go running off and spend the rest of the night playing around in Family Search. And if you go into Family Search and just kind of search their collections for Maryland, this is the list of things that will come up. And then the Maryland Register of Wills Records, when that was entered in, 04, well, it seems like we just found out about it, but I guess time goes by as well, that this really changed our life and has been incredibly useful, particularly during the pandemic when we can't get to the courthouse. And you all know how important wills are for documenting not only someone's death or added content to someone's death, but also to find out more information. And particularly when we're getting back to the period of enslavement in Maryland, you will often find the names of enslaved people referenced in wills. Sometimes it's just by their first name. Sometimes it's very in broad aggregate groups, but wills are particularly important when we're looking at the enslaved time period. But you'll see there that it's browse images, so that it's not indexed yet. So those, I'm sure many of you who do Maryland research probably are familiar with the wills in Family Search, but to keep in mind, if you don't, that they are in there, but you're not going to be finding them if you're just searching generally, because they're not indexed. So you actually need to go into the collection. And for that may be like, well, how do I do that? Well, there we go, browse images, but there are a variety of ways to do that, or a variety of ways to get into it. Now, for those of you who do a lot of research or look in ledgers, or you can see that each volume will have an index in its front. So it's original index. So you can always make your way through there. But also, I'd like to really kind of encourage people to also use the genealogy indexes and abstracts and transcriptions that already exist. And even if you can't get into libraries right now, Maryland, I don't think there's any library in Maryland that's open for any length of time at all to the public. I know that there are other parts of the country where there is some being open, but don't forget that in all these places, I don't know one library where the librarians still aren't working. And I really try to always encourage genealogists, family historians, even plain old historians, to utilize particularly public libraries. And I'm often surprised when I've spoken to groups that people are shocked to know if you just call a public library, they will answer your question. They at least will try to answer your question. You all are probably public library, power users if you are regularly hanging out virtually with Allen County. But keep that in mind. If you're going into, like tonight, if you decide, oh, I didn't know those wills were online like that, you go in, you start searching and you can't find it. If you find a library, if you again search libraries catalogs and you find a library that may have where someone's abstracted or indexed the wills, don't hesitate to call a library. When I say us, I don't necessarily mean me, but feel free to call me if I have a book that relates to the county that you're looking for, but to utilize the libraries themselves. So you can, it's kind of a hybrid. A hybrid is probably a good word. We're doing a lot of hybrid things right now. Schools are hybrid. I'm teaching at Hood College right now. The class is hybrid. I have 6 kids who show up. I have 20 kids online. So when you're doing online research, not only just during the pandemic, but also in the future, think about hybrid. So you may be looking at a website, you may be looking at a database, whether it is a database put up in Ancestry or Family Search, or whether or not you're looking at something on RootsWeb, or whether or not you're looking at a small website that some genealogist has put up in their spare time because it's the pandemic. They've got all this time in their hands. They thought they'd put up a website of all of the newspaper abstracts that they've been reading for the last 15 years. You know how you people are. Sometimes you just come in, just read through the newspaper. So don't hesitate when you're looking at an online source. If you need more information to make it a more fruitful search for you, do then think about contacting a library, which may have a print source that would work well with that. So again, those family search wills, they are not indexed. And even if you make your way through the index that comes with the ledger, if you're not finding something, because sometimes those handwritings can be hard to read, or sometimes you're looking for so many things, you just want to kind of take the, not easier in a bad way, but to take another route to get there, don't hesitate to contact any public library. All my public library colleagues, I think, would not be upset that I told you that. Also, when you're going in and to family search, and this is a good example as well, at least into that, is particularly when you're browsing or even when you're not browsing, to really become a better consumer of whatever you run into online, whether or not, again, it is a database that a commercial entity has put up or something that someone else has put up. When you go into Ancestry and Family Search, read what it says about the database, read what it's telling you, because if you're going into the will index and you're searching for Frederick, volume 17 is not in there. So if you're looking for, 1868, you're going to be in some trouble there. So always, and I'm sure you all do this, it's the same thing as always reading the introduction and the preface to every book you utilize. Do take a look. Okay, so let's say that it's 3 a.m. and you're looking for an early 20th century will, and it's not a good time to call any public library. Okay, this is a resource that I have found to be delightful to utilize, where the Maryland, as you'll see, their Office of the Register of Wills has put up their own index. So if you're at this website, if you go under online services, and I couldn't get my screen to quite kind of show that, there is something called estate search. There we go. So if you went to online services, and trust me, if you click that little arrow, estate search will come up, and this is what you will get. And this will search predominantly 20th century wills for Maryland. There are some earlier wills theoretically, it's 1998 to the present, but it's up to the county to put other information in. And almost every county has put in their older wills, at least up to the turn of the 20th century. And it's also a fabulous site because you can search by last name. You can just go in and search all the Davids. I tried that earlier. It searches really cleanly and really well. You can just search about everything from Frederick. It really searches very cleanly and very nicely. And it's going to pick up, from what I have found, 20th century wills from almost every county, and then a few stray 19th century wills for Washington County in particular. Their clerk of their court is a genealogist himself, so he got right on board, making sure there was as much content in there as possible. I went in and searched Lebhertz, it's actually for Richard Lebhertz, who was one of my volunteers who died several years back. These are Lebhertz's that come back. And you also can sort it. I mean, it sorts beautifully. It's really, again, let me say, a nice, clean database. You can sort it by name, you can sort it by filing date, you can sort it by date of death, but this is the really exciting part. So besides the fact it's going to give you information about wills, again, from 20th century, Frederick County doesn't have, well, of course I searched Lebhertz, so that makes a difference, but I have seen up to the beginning of the 20th century for Frederick. But when it comes back, it tells you, it shows you all the various parts of the process which are available. So let's say you really wanted to just, throw caution to the wind. You could just tonight order all these various things and get the inventory, get the appointment of the resident agent. It's going to give you the representative, so you immediately know who the executor is. It gives you the attorney. Richard's death was relatively recent, just being in 2004. But if you're going back, it's going to give you the same information for 1920, 1900. And again, many counties are putting in more and more. So it's really quick access. And of course, you can then take this information and make your way to the courthouse when it can open and do other things. And then for early 20th century, some of those you also will be finding in Family Search. Again, this was one of those changed my life moments when I found out about this database. Just really fabulous. Okay. And then land again, as I think I said earlier, we do a lot of land research, and land research is so important in Maryland as it is everywhere, not only for putting people in place and time, but to often show relationships within the deed itself, to find out, sometimes you'll find out women's maiden names. And what we find in Maryland, and it might be true other places too, I would assume, is that sometimes slave sales will also be found in the land records. Sometimes I think there were only so many ledgers in the courthouse and they just kept putting all sorts of stuff into the land records. But that is particularly important in Maryland. That's one place where you're going to look for information about enslaved people, are in the deeds and in the land records themselves. So again, we do a lot of land record research. We also get a lot of people who are doing historic house research, which is one of the cousins to genealogy, I like to say. Genealogists, you reach a certain point and you start researching the land, not only to find out were they there in 1634, but you have a better idea then of knowing more about the land and knowing more about the transfer of the land. And then also knowing more about, sometimes the structure itself when you're not just in a bunch of trees. And then you can't really do house research without doing genealogy. So to really start a search for land records, it's just very much like genealogy. You start with the most recent and go back. If you're looking for information about where your family lived, if they lived in downtown Frederick, if you went through a city directory, they lived on Market Street, they lived in 15 Market Street, you might want to then know even more about that property. And in order to get back to that portion in time where your family were living there, you'd start with the most recent owner and make your way back. As in basic genealogy, you're not going to suddenly jump to the mid-19th century. You can lose a lot of content that way. You also can suddenly be kind of in this big void of knowledge. So the SSTAT is really where we first start whenever we're doing any sort of title research. This will allow us to find out the present owners. So again, if you have some idea where your family lived in Frederick or in any town, even out in the county, this will get you started. Now, if you don't have any idea where they live, this will be harder. But there are often ways to find that information out. But again, if you know for a fact they were on this hunk of land and you want to start with the most recent to go back to find out more information about when they were there. So again, SSTAT, the things to know about SSTAT is that you need to know the county they were in. Okay. So if you have no idea, where your people were, they live somewhere in Maryland, this will not be very fruitful for you. But once you figure out where they are in Maryland, you can work from there. But you need to know the county in which they are located. Now, of course, in Maryland, as in all places, location, location, location is very important. County boundaries in Maryland changed over time. And I just wanted to throw this out here because this is one of my favorite websites for understanding the growth and the changing municipalities and the changing boundaries of Maryland. This is an interactive map. So if we were actually on the website and we clicked, next, it would show the each county growing. It's very cool. It's very cool. So just to be aware, because as you need to know if your people were on the same hunk of land, you need to know what was the jurisdiction of that hunk of land at the various times. So just a brief commercial interruption for the history of county formations in Maryland. But back to SSTAT. So I entered the information in here about the location of my library, but the things to keep in mind when you are utilizing SSTAT is that you don't necessarily have to have a street number. So you could say, I just want to see everything on Patrick Street. And it could be if you are doing research relative on people who are relatively recent and they lived on a particular street, you can just go in and search that street. And if it was very recent, you may then find the name. Will sometimes, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, we'll get a patron who will come into the room and I remember visiting my grandmother in the 1950s, but I don't remember now where it was. And my parents are both dead. I have no one to ask. Obviously there's many resources to utilize to get there, things like city directories as well. But sometimes you could just go into SSTAT and search going down Market Street, just going down and looking at everyone who ever lived there. It's not necessarily the cleanest way to go about doing, but it is possible. But to keep in mind, so you don't need a street number, and then don't make your search tricky by adding things like avenue or street or lane, or even sometimes, north, south, east, west. It doesn't search as cleanly, shall we say, as the wills did, but still very useful. And this is what I got back. This is not very exciting because it's the library building. But if you will notice down at the bottom where it says cellar type, this is another structure that I've recently was hoping to buy out in Burkittsville, which is in Frederick County. And it's showing you who the grantor and grantee were. It's giving you the date, and you'll see the arrow pointing at those funny little long numbers. If you were making your way back in a title search, that then would be what is the modern reference for the deed book. So if in Maryland, as in many parts of the country, usually the ledgers, at least in our part of the world, have an alphanumeric system. So to be JS65. And I think that's also true in Pennsylvania and maybe true in New Jersey. So the ledgers are that the alpha comes from the clerk of the court, and the numeric is tracking, something else. But when you get to more modern times, instead of having JS65, you have the deed, you have these funny numbers, which are going to be kind of what the ledger would be, and then the page from the ledger. So just to kind of keep that in mind. And then what's also very cool, I think, and can also be particularly useful for genealogists, if you're in this real property data search, there is a map option. So here we are, it's actually putting you onto a plat map, and will show you exactly the area that you care about. Now, it's very congested here. I was trying to do one for a more rural location earlier today, but it seemed to be cranky. It was having some trouble. But just to give you a feel for, again, where you are in place and time. Okay, and then from there, you can then jump to something called Maryland Land Rec. We are very, very, very fortunate in Maryland that all of our deeds have been digitized. It was a project with the Maryland State Archives, and as you'll see that the clerk of the courts, I believe that the Maryland Department of Transportation also threw some cash at it. And so you need to register, and you can search all the way back, essentially to the Calverts using Maryland Land Rec. I'm not saying it's always a walk in the park. I also will freely admit that I have a strong sense of learned helplessness with it because my volunteer Maryland just loves doing it. And I think, as I said earlier on, I didn't name her by name, but she loves doing title searches and makes us look really good. So we're almost, several times a week just giving her addresses. And because she's, as we all are, is more trapped indoors than she usually is, excuse me, she'll just do a title search, just like take a half hour and do a title search back to, 17, whatever. So Maryland Land Rec, you do need to register to use it, and you do have to get used to using it. But if you're familiar with doing any sort of land research, if you the concept of grantor or grantee, it's certainly worth doing. And more importantly, you can do it online, and you can do it when the courthouses are closed, and you can do it if you're not in the state of Maryland. So it really is an excellent, excellent tool. And I know not every state has this online, has all their land records online, and we are incredibly fortunate that we do. We also have lots of plats online. And again, this is coming out of the same, kind of the same, what's the right word? The same emphasis on getting this information out into the world and getting it as accessible as possible. So we have Maryland Land Rec and also plats.net. And always keep in mind the beginner's guide, or whatever you see that will help you really to utilize the tool more importantly, or to use it more effectively. And I know, as probably many of you are somewhat experienced genealogists, if you're hanging out here again on Tuesdays and Thursdays, is always taking a look at the directions, the introductions, the foreword, the beginner's guides, all the directions that you will find relating to any sorts of sources, any sorts of tools we utilize, whether they're book or online. Okay, then we have the Maryland Historical Trust. This is our state agency for historic preservation. This is where our state historic preservation officer works out of. And the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties is, again, something that we're really fortunate to have, where they have taken the survey forms. And if you're not familiar with historic preservation in this context and survey forms, they're not the sort of survey work that our buddy George Washington would have done. It's survey work that is done by sometimes by the state roads, sometimes by county preservation officers, sometimes by individual people who are trying to document their house in some way. A lot of this comes from Section 106 compliance and the National Historic Preservation Act from about 25 years ago. Think of it this way. Not all of this work pertains to that, but it's very much like looking for bald eagles. You know, there are certain laws against Section 106 compliance where if public monies are being utilized to put in a highway, shall we say, then the state is responsible for knowing, will that highway impact any sort of archaeological or structural site? So again, equated to looking for bald eagles when they're putting highways in. So that brings forth the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties. Every state is responsible for Section 106 compliance. Every state has a state historic preservation officer. We've just been really fortunate that all of the survey forms, all the work that's been done, that's been submitted to the Maryland Historical Trust has put up. And I truly believe this is a source that genealogists should spend more time utilizing. So if we're here, you'll see that it search the MIHP, again, the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties. And think of it this way too, when I say survey forms, if a property has been surveyed, it's as if little reports have been written about that property. Now, depending upon the reason for the survey work, the amount of money behind the work being done, whether or not it is someone who's paying to have their house, for example, put on the National Register, or are paying to have a survey work done because they're looking for particular tax credits. Sometimes it can be beefier. Sometimes the survey work can be what we call windshield survey, where you may have a county preservation planner who only has, 3 weeks to do so many miles. They go through it and it's much more, again, windshield. So they don't have the time to do a lot of intensive research. So depending upon the form, you can find lots of really, really beefy information, sometimes with complete title searches, sometimes with lots of historic information, sometimes with lots of photographs. Sometimes they aren't that intensive. But if your family has been anywhere for any length of time, if they didn't just come through Maryland in the 1970s, I truly believe that you should take a look and see if your people are in any structure that has been surveyed by the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties. And you can see there, you can search by particular counties. You can pick Kent County, Howard County, Frederick County. And then you can enter an address. So again, if you know that your people lived on Market Street, or you know your people lived on Mountain Church Road at some point in time, or you know they lived in Adamstown, you can just enter that information and a list will come back for you. You also can search by property name. If you've never done this and your family is historically in Maryland and were here very early on and maybe are still here or up through the 19th century into the 20th century, it wouldn't hurt to go in, to put on that sticky note on the bulletin board in your mind to search for a property name that may include your last name. When survey work is being done, the surveyor, the historic preservation planner, the architectural historian will often look for a historic name in order to name the property. They're not going to use the present owner because that is much more fleeting. So often they try to find who would be the original owner. So for example, if your family owned land and appeared on any of the 19th century property ownership maps for Maryland, then you could be a property. So if your family lived in Frederick County in 1872, you're on the 1873 atlas. You could go in and enter your name, and you may come back and find that structures that were owned by your family have been surveyed. Okay, you also, again, just search by county. We can just get a list. I think I went too far. Okay, so I went in and I just searched by Frederick, and this is showing you starting, and they're numbered this way. In Maryland, at least, they're numbered for the F means Frederick County, 1 will mean the district, and then we have the site is given a particular number. And over on the right, where you see the little PDFs, if you clicked on that, that would bring up the survey forms. So even if your family never owned land, okay, for a fact we never owned land, it doesn't mean there aren't particular survey forms that you should be taking a look at. It's all about that context, and it's looking for that broader understanding of the world in which your people lived, a broader understanding of the not only the political history, but the social history of the community in which they were in. So if you know that they lived in Adamstown, well, it may be useful to take a look at a history of the Adamstown Public Library. You also can, again, search just by road. So you could just go down, even if their property was never surveyed or their house is long gone, but they were on Washington Street in Adamstown. If you look at the survey forms for the other properties on Washington Street, it will give you, they should give you a broader understanding, again, of the community. And it's very much along the lines of you never know where your family is going to appear. The more you know about a community, the more you know about how to understand the world in which your people lived and how to research that world. Suddenly become familiar with records you didn't know existed. And again, it's also part of the whole fan club concept. The more you know, the more you know, the more you know. Okay, so even if you just take a look at the church, if they went to St. Joseph's Church on Carrollton Manor, that may be useful too, because you may read through that survey form and find out, and this I don't know, I'm making this part up, but there was a fire in 1875. No wonder I can't find the burial records. Again, the more you know about the community and those organizations that impacted your people's lives, the better understanding you have for doing your own research. So looking at these survey forms are just like reading a county history. It's just like looking through an Arcadia Press pictorial history about that community. As you can tell, I'm a big proponent of using survey forms to do research. There's a wonderful library at the Maryland Historical Trust, and the previous librarian used to always say, we don't have sources for genealogy. Well, these are sources for genealogy. They may not have indexes and abstracts to vital records. They may not collect published family histories, but anything that tells the history of the area, as you all know, is part of genealogy, okay? And if your people, let's say you believe your people were in Point of Rocks and they are Masons, looking about information about the Masonic building may also then change your life in some way. Or if they just worked for Lime Kiln, if they just were workers there, if they were dirt poor workers at Lime Kiln who never owned any land, who barely kept, a roof over their heads, you still may find useful information about their lives looking at the industrial entities that they worked under. And always keep in mind historic districts as well. So if they lived in Buckystown, but you don't find the address that you're looking for, look at the entire historic district, because the historic district is where they take a survey form and they'll do it more as an aggregate. Okay, so again, if you go in and you search for a particular address, they lived on Mountville Row in Adamstown. Well, you're not finding anything, but if there's an Adamstown historic district, look at that too. Okay, then to kind of continue on with governmental records, this is, as you can see, the Maryland Judiciary Case Search. This is our court records. Now, they are recent court records, so it's going to be, if you're looking for someone very recent, this doesn't have a lot of It only goes back 20 or 30 years, and not always that. And sometimes the information goes away. It doesn't always stay in here. But if you're looking for a late 20th century and early 21st century divorce, this is the way to go. Let's say you're just trying to locate cousins. Now, I'm not saying you're necessarily, spying to see if they've, have speeding tickets or anything along those lines. But if you're trying to find people in the community, this can be really, really useful. I have had particularly adoption seekers who are looking for particular living people. As we all know, looking for living people, which I think is always a lot of fun, is a particular, subset of genealogy, which requires sometimes knowledge of different types of records. And a lot of these are records that are not going to yet be publicly accessible. But the records that appear in here sometimes are. So again, I'm not necessarily saying that you should be spying on your neighbors, but if you're looking for someone who is alive now and they lived in Maryland, this might be one way to find them, because they might have a speeding ticket or even something more severe. But you will find people particularly good for divorces, and just finding if someone is in the community, if they're like me and frequently have speeding tickets. So it's just worth taking a look at. It doesn't go that far back, but really very useful. I had a gentleman come in one time who didn't know that he had fathered a child who would have been, the kid would have been about in his 30s now. He was not told that his girlfriend had gotten pregnant. They had only been involved for a short time. So he and his present wife, and he didn't marry the girl, but he and his wife came in and they're trying to locate this boy they never knew about. And unfortunately, I found him in the judiciary case searching for something that was not a speeding ticket, but allowed us to find where this person was. So if you're looking for modern people, this is one place to look for modern people. Okay, and then as I said before, newspapers. Newspapers, as we all know, are so important for genealogy and for doing history. And I don't know what it's been about the pandemic, but I've had more people contact me about how to locate particular newspapers. Now, as we all know, many newspapers, there's lots of newspapers. There's oodles. And we go back to our oodles. There's oodles of newspapers. Not all of them have been saved, or not all of them, the entire runs have been saved, or not all of them, the entire runs may be saved, but we don't know where they are. And it's often surprising how, someone cleans out grandma's attic and newspapers people didn't even know about existed. There was an African-American newspaper in Frederick in the early 20th century, and there's only one issue of it left that anyone is familiar with. There's some more information about the existence of the paper in some sources that document African-American newspapers when they were being published, but there's only one issue of this newspaper that anyone knows about, and it was saved because someone's marriage announcement was in it. So it was found in the last 10 years. I don't think before that. So we never know when newspapers are going to appear. There are newspapers, that are in Ancestry that have been digitized by Newspaper Archive, by newspapers.com. But there are also newspapers that are in websites that are not commercial websites, where someone doesn't need to pay for it, whether it's your library yourself. And I'm hoping you're all familiar with Chronicling America, which is at the Library of Congress. This comes out of the NEH newspaper project that was starting in the late 80s into the early 90s. The next step of that has been digitizing. Very early on when this was first done, people went throughout the countryside. In every state there was an institution who was in charge of the newspaper project, and they were trying to find where the actual hard copies of the newspapers are located. That has since moved on, and now the newspaper projects now are into digitizing it. So this is at the University of Maryland, the Historic Maryland Newspapers Project. This is the digitization arm of the NEH earlier Maryland newspaper project, and this is their website. And it feeds into, so if you see that there, and actually Pam, who is in charge of this aspect of the newspaper project, might actually be with us here today. She was going to come in. But if you take a look at this website, you'll notice it says, click here to browse digitized Maryland newspapers. So yes, you can go right to Chronicling America. Chronicling America is a fabulous website. Again, our tax dollars at work. Very exciting that it exists, something that I think people often don't forget about. We all know there's lots of things to remember. There's lots of sources to think about in regards to doing genealogy. lots of places to look, which is why, again, I keep, I had that whole idea, that concept of having the bulletin board in your mind or the bulletin board in your home office where you have these little sticky notes, have I checked Chronicling America this year? It's hard to remember. So it is very much like all of those noodles, all those sources that are intertwined. And there's the sources I'm going to be talking about for the next couple of slides are very much intertwined. They're just like all those noodles, very much intertwined. But so you can go directly to Chronicling America, or you can just go to this website, the University of Maryland, click here to browse digitized Maryland newspapers, and it then immediately sends you to Chronicling America and just gives you Maryland. So you don't have to worry about those, 49 other pesky states. You can just go right here, and it's showing you the titles that have been digitized and the number of issues that have been digitized, the earliest issue, the latest issue. It's really a very clean way to get right to it, okay? You'll also notice there, it says Maryland Newspaper Gateway. So again, if we go to the website for the Historic Maryland Newspaper Project, there's an access point there that takes us right to Chronicling America and just to the Maryland newspapers there. But the Maryland Newspaper Gateway will then send us to this screen, which will then, what comes back from here is a survey of the digitized newspapers wherever they may appear. So it's not going to just say, oh, here's what's in Chronicling America. It will come back and say, oh, this newspaper, it's in Newsbank. This newspaper, Newspaper Archive. This newspaper, the newspaper itself put it up. So it's really very handy because, as we all know, not every newspaper is in newspapers.com or in Newspaper Archive or have been digitized by ProQuest. I wish all newspapers were digitized by ProQuest, but that's not the way of the world. And there are lots of digitized products out there that we may not know about. They may belong to subscription databases that our libraries can't afford, or again, are at a website like Carroll County Public Library has digitized a Carroll County newspaper, which if you don't live in Carroll County or don't go to their website regularly, if they're not on your sticky note of things to do in your mind, I should regularly, twice a year, I should go to Carroll County Public Library's website and take a look at what they have. You wouldn't know that. So you'd be, scouring Ancestry, you'd be scouring newspapers archive, looking for that newspaper, but it's just sitting right there at the public library. Okay, then we have the Maryland State Archives, which is a partner in regards to newspaper, a partner to all of us, of course, who work in Maryland, but a partner with the University of Maryland. They are the keepers of the information from the original newspaper survey. So while that website that I showed you from the University of Maryland is dealing with the digitized content that's coming out of the newspaper project, and hopefully I'm presenting that, I'm saying that correctly. But here it's going to give you the information back from the original survey. So this will tell you where the hard copies are. Perhaps less relevant in our present world, because you can't necessarily title off to every library you'd like to go to, but don't forget the staff are there. Even if they're not on site, they're taking a look at their emails. So let me just say, probably for the 800th time, do not hesitate during this pandemic time to contact these institutions you would normally be visiting. They are there, even if it takes them a little while longer to get to their email. So Maryland State Archives, you're looking, was there ever a newspaper from Crisfield? You'd go into here and you'd be able to find out if it was identified in the original newspaper project. And then this is the sort of information you'd get back. This is the Frederick Herald. It's showing you who owns the newspaper and what parts of the run they have. And I will admit, this isn't always the easiest thing to utilize. At least here in Maryland, they used DBase 3 when they were putting it together. If anyone among us remembers DBase 3. So the print copy of it can be very difficult to read. You have to just kind of get into the right frame of mind. And it's using lots of weird little codes, which if you're not familiar with can be misleading. But if you're looking for a particular issue, that's one way to find it out. And then it will tell you, if most of them will tell you whether or not it has been indexed or abstracted in a print publication. So if you're looking for the Frederick Herald, and you'll see there that L. Tilden Moore, Larry Moore, those of us in Frederick, that he did do an abstract book that runs from 1831 to 1840. So while you may not be able to get to either the hard copy right now of the newspaper or the digitized copy of the newspaper, you might be able to find a library such as the Maryland who has that, who could check it up for you. So again, it's looking at all these various access points that may exist and how to get to the information that you're looking for. Okay, I know we're running out of time. Also, the Maryland State Archives, they have their own interface for digitized newspapers. So you can get that off of University of Maryland. You also can get that off of Maryland State Archives. And again, if you clicked on any of those, it would tell you who has digitized that and where it's accessible. Okay. And the Maryland State Archives, if you haven't been there, is a huge website. And again, lots of noodles interflowing among each other. And on another part of their website, under the portion that talks about early state records, they have taken the microfilm and put it up for these earlier newspapers. So always lots of access points. And the State Archives, it's a huge website. It has lots of different types of databases, and you have to go to many places. So I guess kind of the online takeaway for this is that, and this is true probably for most websites you go to, just like it's true whenever you search an online catalog. If you're not getting a hit by the author, search the title. If you're not getting a hit by Baltimore Clipper, try searching it a variety of ways on the same website. Okay, then kind of our big finish as we head to the end here. Digital Maryland, this is out of the State Library Resource Center, which is a resource for all Maryland public libraries. It lives at the Pratt Library in downtown Baltimore, again, the central branch of Baltimore City. And they are a Public Library of America hub. And what Digital Maryland has been doing, gosh, for way over 15 years now, is that they have been digitizing items not only at the Pratt Library, but digitizing items and collections in public libraries throughout, and not just public libraries, and institutions throughout the state, in museums and public libraries and historical societies. We have, I think, 5 collections up through Digital Maryland, which I have a very small staff. It's myself and my coworker and my volunteers. We would not be able to digitize anything because we are working with our patrons all the time and dealing with those collections right in front of us that we unfortunately don't have time to worry about, to not worry, that makes it sound bad. We don't have the time to take the opportunity to get more of our, to push more of our collections out into the world this way. And they have many things, not only that relate to local history, and again, going back to the idea, the more you know about the community, more you know, but they also have genealogical content. This is a collection which I just love and wish I had an actual reason to utilize it, but it's this fabulous collection of African-American funeral programs. Just really, really great stuff. You can see here an example. So they have things from Washington County Free Library. They have things from Pratt, the Greensboro Historical Society, the Carroll County History Project. You're going to find things here for throughout the state and that live in many different types of institutions. You also can kind of see there that they have, photographs, they have oral histories, they have a city director, a business director. They have a variety of different options for different types of things up there. And also they have this small subset of a collection. You'll see there on the left, the collection names, but they also have started this kind of catch-all collection, kind of a bucket of collection that's genealogy and family history. So while many of the collections, I would argue that they have up, I forget how many collections they have, but of the many hundreds of collections they have, lots of them will be relevant for genealogy, even if they don't have strict genealogical content. They still will give community information that will help genealogists to better understand the world. But this is where they've put a bunch of things that are just basic genealogy content. The previous manager was really trying to make the collection, to make Digital Maryland even more appealing to genealogists. You'll notice there the cookbook compiled by Margaret Thomas Arts. She is the founder of my library, and those are our recipes. But then we have down at the bottom, death and burial notices of African Americans. This is a project of one of my volunteers who just loves to index. And what he did, he spent 5 years going through our local newspaper, the Frederick News, and looking for colored obituaries. Prior to 1956, Black people were identified by their race in their obituaries. So he created this incredible database, which we have printed out into book form, which allows us to provide really quick access to African Americans who died in Frederick County. It's a quick way to get to people's obituaries. It's a quick way to identify people who are in particular cemeteries. We have the problem in Frederick County, as in many places where there's been several African American cemeteries that have been damaged and destroyed, and there were no records. There's no records for a lot of cemeteries, Black or white, but it allows us to give an idea of who's in that particular cemetery. And fabulous, but we have been able to make this accessible through Digital Maryland. So for example, if you're researching African Americans from Frederick County, you make your way to Digital Maryland at 3 a.m. one day, go down this list, you'll see the date for the obituary. You then simply email us and we'll get you the obituary. Okay, then there's Wilbur, which comes out of Washington County Free Library. It is Western, so like Digital Maryland is out of the State Library Resource Center, And then Wilbur is out of the Western Maryland Resource Center, Western Maryland Libraries, and it's picking up Garrett, Allegheny, and Washington counties. There's a woman named Jill Craig, who is the digitization librarian there. She does a fabulous job. And it's similar to Digital Maryland, where she has been digitizing things in the collection at Washington County Free Library in the Western Maryland, but also digitizing things she finds in other library collections and also things she finds out in the public. A lot of what Jill does too is she curates these, I almost consider them exhibits on particular topics. She has won awards, local history awards, for this fabulous site. So if you have people in Western Maryland, you should regularly take a look and see if she's added content that is particular to your people. And then here's just more of what Jill has put up. Digital Maryland does a fabulous job. Jill also does a fabulous, fabulous job. And then Maryland Historical Magazine, it is the academically done publication of Maryland history. It has been digitized, except for the most recent issues, by a partnership with the Maryland State Archives and Maryland Historical, now the Maryland Center for History and Culture. You can access the older issues through this portal here. You just need to register. It's very quick, and you don't get weird emails. That's a particularly fine thing. They're just tracking for their own statistical purposes, and you can get in, and you'll see there it has the full run, except for the more recent ones. You know, the last 2 years, they need to have something to encourage people to be members. And then the Maryland History and Culture Bibliography. This is Liz at the University of Maryland. This was a project of the Maryland Humanities Council many years back. Think of it kind of as Percy, just Maryland specific, where they have gone through and indexed Maryland Historical Magazine, newsletters relating to the small historical societies, really all sorts of periodicals, both professional and academically done, and also more popular, that pick up Maryland topics. They're in the midst of changing how the website is up. So right now it doesn't search as well, but it doesn't search as sophisticatedly, the barrier has broken down. So what you can do now is you can just look at the spreadsheet and make your way through the spreadsheet. It's really worth taking a look at. You should go in again, search by the surname you're interested in, the communities you're interested in. Think of it as Percy, just for Maryland specific. And then once you find what you're looking for, you can always then see if you can find it online somewhere, or contact some library that may have the run of that newsletter or that magazine. Then Legacy of Slavery in Maryland. This comes out of the Maryland State Archives. Its emphasis, obviously, is to document the lives of enslaved people in Maryland. For that reason, it's very useful. My timer went off, in case you're wondering why the Schuyler sisters were suddenly hearing. But the major reason I entered bringing this up, besides searching the database, is that even if you don't do any African-American research in Frederick County, even if your people were not enslavers, even if you're not dealing with enslaved folk, it has a really lovely set of 19th century maps. You can find maps all over the place online, of course, but this is a quick access point. If you want to find a 19th century map of Frederick County or Howard County or Montgomery County, nicely done, very easy to get to. Of course, these maps are many places. Library of Congress has maps up, but this is like one good thing to always keep in your mind. Okay, then finally, I know I've said finally before, but kind of two final websites I wanted to mention that are Frederick County specific. This is Mid-Maryland Roots, which is put together by one particular genealogist who does a really fabulous job. She does lots of indexing and abstracting of court records, but I wanted to bring it to everyone's attention because it has maps of the hundreds. These are maps that she has had drawn. Hundreds were how Maryland was broken out in the 18th century. I think Delaware is still broken out into hundreds. They're kind of like townships for those of you in New Jersey or Pennsylvania. The idea being it's 100 families or 100 men eligible to serve. And it's hard because you will find references to someone being in a particular 100, but there's not maps of that time period which show that. But you can kind of see that little teeny map right there. She's done these incredible, drawn maps that give you a feel for the where the hundreds are that you're interested in and the growth and shrinkage of these hundreds. And then Frederick Roots, this comes out of a gentleman, Rick Smith, who's a Maryland patron. He's also very involved in our African-American group, Arch. And Rick does a lot of research on African-American genealogy. And he has gone through the deeds looking for manumissions. I mentioned you will find in deeds all sorts of information relating to enslaved people. And he has put it up online. So again, if you're looking for African Americans in Frederick County in the mid-19th century, or if your family were people who had large plantations and would have had enslaved folk, it's part of your history. It's also another way to search there. So you can search by the owner's name You can search by the enslaved person's name. It's wonderful that he makes that so accessible. Okay, then one, I know I said this before, almost one final thing. You're probably familiar with WorldCat. Keep in mind when you're searching WorldCat that Maryland public libraries generally are not in the public WorldCat. I know people use WorldCat to identify locations of books, but Maryland public libraries are generally not going to be found in WorldCat. So if you're looking for a book on Frederick County and you're using WorldCat and it says, oh, Frederick doesn't have that, Frederick should have that, go directly to the website of the county that you care about, because they're not all going to be in there. Okay, and then finally, a little advertisement. Again, don't hesitate to contact me at any point in time, but also I've been doing these weekly genealogy moments. I think I've done 44 so far, and if you go to fcpl.org, you will find them. If you can't get too much of me, if you want to see what I have to say about 15 minutes about who doesn't love a cemetery, feel free to go there.